I would like to request President Ipri to please share his welcome remarks with us.
All praises to Allah the Almighty, the most beneficent, the most merciful. Honorable Minister for State for Pakistan, Ms. Hina Rabbani Kar, distinguished ladies and gentlemen who are present here as well as those who are online, Assalamu alaikum and good afternoon. As President Islamabad Policy Research Institute, which is commonly called as IPRI, it is my proud privilege and a matter of great honor to welcome and extend gratitude to you all for sparing your valuable time, for joining us in this dialogue, which has become a very premier international conference, commonly known as Margalla Dialogue. I am particularly thankful to the national and international speakers and participants who have traveled to Islamabad from all over the world and from Pakistan. Indeed, your partaking adds value to this dialogue. Margalla Dialogue was conceived in 2019 by IPRI. It purposes to deliberate on geoeconomics, geopolitics, security, but more importantly, on the human security. Margalla Dialogue has carved out a niche as one of the most important national dialogues in the country. It features a mix of academics, scholars, practitioners, and policymakers from Pakistan as well as abroad. This year we have about 13 international speakers with us for this important dialogue from all over the globe, from all the continents. Since its inception, fortunately, Margalla Dialogue has been patronized by the national leadership, which underscores the importance of this dialogue. We endeavor to gather leading experts on matters related to contemporary developments, technology, traditional as well as non-traditional security challenges. The spirit of dialogue lies in frank discussions without any inhibitions, which makes it more valuable and richer value addition. The main theme of this year's dialogue is navigating the great power rivalry, and it is from a developing world's perspective. The topic is reflective of the current global realities which countries like Pakistan are confronted with. We are confronted with stark policy choices emanating from competitive world politics. The desired transition of Pakistan and other developing countries from geopolitics to geoeconomics is not possible unless these countries attain economic independence, especially without external dependency. Spread over 3 days, this year's Margalla Dialogue would comprise 4 forums and a special session. The subjects like economic decision making in the times of global crisis, future international order, being human in the age of technology, and vision of Pakistan at 100 will be discussed. A special session on day 3 shall be dedicated to the future of Pakistan. The policy landscape of Pakistan needs to be served by the right policy inputs that are grounded in reason and supported by grounded research. This 3 days discourse by experts and the subsequent debate with participation of the civil society, practitioners and scholars is expected to generate valuable ideas that would surely be useful for future policy choices. For attaining the objectives of politico-economic and internal stability, we urgently need to adopt policies that can help resolve the issues that engender societal discord. Besides developing human security, we need to develop human capital, and the security environment of Pakistan and surrounding needs to be improved through resolution of intractable interstate as well as intrastate disputes. Regional peace and stability through greater connectivity and economic independence should be our goal. We are indeed lucky to have amongst us Ms. Hina Rabbani Khair, who embodies intellect and experience of statecraft. She has the best visibility of the challenges that confront developing countries like Pakistan. Today, she represents the Prime Minister of Pakistan and the government of Pakistan. As you all know, that unfortunately, Prime Minister of Pakistan has contracted COVID and he will not be available. May Allah bless him with quick recovery. We very eagerly look forward to your valuable insights, ma'am, and vision for Pakistan that becomes a competition-resilient country of the developing world. With these few words, I request you to come over and say a few words. Thank you so much.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum and good afternoon to everyone. Ambassador Raza Mohammed, President IPRI, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, participants, ambassadors, ex-ambassadors. It is truly my pleasure to be representing the government of Pakistan and certainly the Prime Minister, who, as we all know, has contracted COVID and inshallah will be amongst us taking care of his responsibilities very soon. So unfortunately you got me instead of him. So here I am. And I am particularly keen to be filling up for him because I think the topic that has been chosen is one which touches all of us. It doesn't matter what our geography, it actually doesn't even matter what our history. It doesn't matter whether we are developed, developing, or underdeveloped. This great power competition that we thought we'd see perhaps a few decades later is upon us. So it's interesting that two areas which I thought would be something that my children would have to deal with, and we do it only for the sake of holding it for them, the climate threat and the return of the great power competition came sooner than we had envisioned, in my view. Now, goes without saying that we are truly living through a time of what I call seismic shifts in the global order. We had gotten accustomed to a world after the end of the Cold War, which was generally predictable, which was generally going through a certain type of order or complying with that. And we heard back at the end of the Cold War the question of whether this is going to be the end of history and all of us are going to be like little streams running into a river and a river will finally run through it, by Fukuyama, and then we were told by Huntington that could be also a clash of civilizations that is at our doorstep. And for the next 2 decades, I think we saw a happy end of history or end to history. And everybody seemed to be moving towards a certain order, complying by it. Those who were not in its fold were coming in its fold, and we were happily living through life. Now, as it happens, the clash of civilizations, or the clash of orders, at least, is upon us. Now, today's geopolitics is marked by what? It is marked by renewed great power rivalries. It is marked by reinforcement of traditional military alliances and at the same time building interesting and unexpected new military alliances also. The emergence of new groupings and smaller configurations coming in front of us. War has unexpectedly returned to the European continent, and you see its impact being felt all over the world. The dangers of conflict loom large in the Asia-Pacific. You have entities like NATO having an Asia-Pacific strategy. Those who had prematurely predicted clearly what I referred to earlier as the end of history are in for a surprise and are struggling to fathom, admittedly, this return of what I call history with a vengeance. Now, paradoxically, it was all fine if everything else was lovely and beautiful, and we would have the time and the energy because everything else, the poor had been taken care of, the planet was a happy planet, and we could then venture into more groupings and probably seeking conflict. Now, unfortunately, this is happening at a time that our world is also facing what I consider its biggest existential threat, the threat to the very planet that we inhabit, and also a multitude of complex and interlinked threats and challenges. Now, there's ample recognition that no single power, I think we can all agree, or select group of countries can address and resolve these challenges all on their own. Only through collective and comprehensive approach can we effectively tackle these challenges that we face, which are existential in every which way. Now, it is interesting as we look forward that unilateralism and populism are on the rise when we need them least. When we collectively need the world to come together to deal with these existential threats, what do we have the world return to us with? Unilateralism and populism. The drift towards a new Cold War appears almost inexorable. Multilateral mechanisms that were set up in the first place for peaceful settlement of disputes, avoidance of conflict, and pursuit of common development objectives are losing efficacy or are clearly being sidelined. I ask you the question, when was the last time an intervention or a military exercise was done with the blessings of the UNSC approval? I think this gives us some fodder to think. The UN system, which is still immensely important for enforcing a just and equitable international order, is being undercut many a times by the very powers that underwrote it. So it's truly a strange, interesting world that we're living in. Confrontation is increasingly eclipsing cooperation. Bloc politics threatens to accentuate the global fault lines. Global governance and decision-making are devolving from universal, formal structures and platforms of interstate engagement to more informal groupings. Flux and uncertainty are likely to be the key features and are already the key features of the global and regional environment that we see and that we can predict for the foreseeable future. Now, at the same time, while there's been a lot of talk for the last many decades of the great Asian century, the epicenter of the global power struggle has also moved to Asia. Bad luck for Asia. But this has happened at the same time. If you look around Asia, do you see SAARC suddenly becoming much more effective than before? I see it not. What you see is, in fact, ASEAN, which used to be a functional body, becoming less functional than before. So virtually, as I said in the beginning, no country is immune from these profound changes that are happening all around us. And several of these have a bearing on every country's projected national interest. Efforts to isolate one country, contain another, and prop up another to deal with the containment of the first, you can fill in the blanks, are all might be serving certain interests, but certainly not serving Asia's interest or the world's interest, I may say. Now, what we need to understand is that the common threats faced by humankind right now have become even more acute as we clobber for more broken world order in some ways. Climate change, environmental degradation, and viruses, we have all seen respect no borders. The spread of emerging disruptive technologies threatens to subsume the entire humanity, let alone a single nation state or a collection of them. The disruption of supply chains in what was an increasingly interconnected world, whether due to health pandemics, armed conflicts, or changing weather patterns, affects the global south disproportionately. From the food and fuel price inflation to the plummeting of growth rates, from the accumulation of debt burden to political instability to social unrest. So this is a broad scenario that I have tried to lay in front of you, and I'm going to pause here for a second and reflect on some quotes from some learned statesmen of yesteryears who experienced such rivalries in the past and were perhaps instrumental in creating the world order as we experience in the last few decades. So when I read that President Nixon had said in 1972 to Time magazine, I think it will be a safer world and a better world if we have a strong, healthy United States Europe, Soviet Union, China, Japan, each balancing each other, right? I don't see this to be the core, principle that we seem to be following right now. Then I remember the famous Winston Churchill's dictum, in victory, magnanimity. And I ask you, in these crises that we see all around us, how much magnanimity have we seen? And then my favorite, President Roosevelt, who we all know was the 32nd US president from 1933 to 1945, and that becomes even more important, 1945, just when the new world order had in some ways emerged. He said a very important thing, and I quote, "We have learned that we cannot live alone, at peace, that our own well-being is dependent on the well-being of other nations far away. We have learned that we must live as men, not as ostriches, not as dogs in the manga. We have learned to be citizens of the world, members of the human community. We have learned the simple truth, and as Emerson said, that the only way to be a friend is to be one." Okay, so I ask ourselves the question, have we happily unlearned all these lessons from history? And as I glance around the world today, the somewhat detailed scenario that I already shared with you all, and try and absorb the echo of lessons drawn by influential men who navigated their way through global conflicts and disputes, I draw the following simple conclusions, and then we'll go on to perhaps talk in slightly more detail about Pakistan's perspectives on the world that we see in front of us today. One, that we cannot achieve one security at the expense of the other. We are safe if others around us are also safe. Friendship begets friendship, hostility begets hostility. All conflicts result in a new balance, but a balance that could have emerged without hostilities in the first place. Civility is the most fundamental achievement of human society. In the international arena, this is represented by only two things, dialogue and diplomacy. We can either fight or we can sit around a table and talk. Our end product will hardly change, whichever method we employ. What will, however, change is how much destruction we do in reaching the conclusions that we reach. Now, Pakistan comes to the international fora with a certain, guided by its geography, but not unable to unlearn the lessons of history that we have seen by conflict in our backyard, not for 2 years or 4 years, but literally 4 decades, or perhaps even more. Now, Pakistan's foreign policy must obviously effectively respond to the many challenges and shifting trends as we see happening around us. We must, like any other country, put the highest premium on our own interests and our stated interests. We must navigate through this complex external environment to ensure that Pakistan's sovereignty, territorial integrity, and independence are fully safeguarded, and that is no different than any other country's stated policy. And that our agenda of national economic development is optimally advanced. Indeed, lifting the standards of living for our people and ensuring sustained progress and prosperity remains our quintessential national goal. So, a lot of people ask, how do you define Pakistan's foreign policy? What should be Pakistan's foreign policy? And I always say, I wish foreign policy was something that you could write on a plank and put it outside the Foreign Office and say, this is Pakistan's foreign policy. Unfortunately, you can't do that. You make foreign policy as you go every day with the decisions that come to your desk and the choices that you make. Now, for a country like Pakistan, diplomacy has traditionally been our first line of defense, and rightly so. Our foreign policy is accordingly geared to help protect and promote our core national interests. We must make sure that it is always national interests that is upfront. No parochial interest should come into play, our own or anyone else's. We have worked hard over the last many decades to build trust, confidence, and credibility. That, in my view, are the very foundation of our foreign relations all over the world. Pakistan has spent its energies in reinvigorating and consolidating long-standing partnerships and forging new ones on the principles of mutual respect, mutual interest, peaceful coexistence, and win-win cooperation. We have naturally focused also on our immediate neighborhood. Afghanistan has played a major role consumed a lot of our time, our attention, our resources. We are all very aware of that. India and its emerging drift away in the last decade from the secular India that we all grew up to know, and the Jammu and Kashmir dispute remains of vital interest to Pakistan. We also continue to seek balanced, objective, broad-based and mutually beneficial relations with all major powers, the P5, the European Union and other key development partners, and abiding friends such as Saudi Arabia, Turkey, the Gulf states. We have been, over the last few decades, also been trying to deepen our outreach to other regions, to Africa, to Southeast Asia, and certainly to the Central Asian republics, who are a key to our aspiration for connectivity in this particular region. Now, we want to move ahead into a new era which is not defined by conflict and confrontation, but by peace and prosperity, and bring the dividends of economic growth and development also to our people, which other people all over the world have perhaps enjoyed. Rather than becoming a part of any bloc or any conflict, Pakistan has consciously, over the last few decades, chosen to be only a partner for peace and development. And for that to be forced to be part of a conflict is a choice that we will never make. And it is a choice that we hope the world can respect and appreciate. Now, from peace for development to peaceful neighborhood, to pivot to geoeconomics, whatever nomenclature you may use, the thrust of our foreign policy is consistent. And what is it? It is about promoting our economic development, promoting our security interests, forging goodwill towards all the nations of the world, and making our contributions to advancement of international peace, security, progress, and prosperity as we see fit. Now, coming to specific topics which have consumed us all and consumed the global order and the globe on the world stage. The continuation of the Ukrainian conflict remains a matter of deep concern to all countries. It reflects in many ways the failure of diplomacy and has led to humanitarian suffering for the people which are engulfed by it. We support an immediate cessation of hostilities and a return to dialogue for finding a solution based on international law and principles of the UN Charter. We have adopted a non-partisan, principled approach to this, and our voting pattern within the United Nations shows that. Our explanation of votes are something which categorically articulate what Pakistan's position is. Now, in this new world, where increasingly groupings are happening, and it is increasingly becoming a divided world, it is being projected as a battle between good and evil, between the liberal and the non-liberal. Eventually, at the end of the day, I think every country should be allowed the space and should be respected for its right to come to the multilateral fora from its own perspective, based on the lessons of both its geography and its history. To expect anything beyond that would be a disservice to the multilateral fora. And this urgency, or this urge to divide the countries in the good and the evil, is what is the biggest threat to the multilateral working of the world order as it exists. It is dangerous. And we have seen that play of dangerous, in some ways arm twisting over many countries in the developing world to come out in the open. Now, interestingly, we also feel a great threat coming in, emanating from our easternly neighbor. And I will just pause for a moment and give you an example. So a lot of countries, in my previous life as Minister of State for Economic Affairs, Finance, I remember that's about almost a decade and a half to 2 decades back. I remember everyone coming to us and telling us how we need to create connectivity, how we need to have more regional cooperation. And when you sit in Pakistan and look around the world, from the perspective of your geography, and say that we are a country which wants to trade with our neighbors, what do we see? We look towards our west and we see a country which is under exceptional sanctions for the last many decades, and therefore if we want to do a gas pipeline, we are unable to see that through, which is certainly in our interest, but unable to see that through. Then we see further down in the west, Again, a country which has gone through 4 decades of conflict and now does not have functional banking channels for anyone to be able to do any business with. And we all believe our stated objectives of every country in the world is to assist the Afghan people. And yet, they have been left to their own devices, not able to trade or invest or have an honest living. That's the reality of our geography right now. Then we look towards the east, and we have a country which has suddenly found its space as, or its place in the world as one which is disallowing anyone who's not Hindu to operate freely in that country, and has done legislation and many other things to do that. But the world will happily look away from that because that's a big country. That's a country with which the world has economic interests. So the world will encourage us to forget about that wrong and to concentrate on another wrong. We all have to concentrate first on the wrongs which are in our geography, which affect our own people directly, and then look further on onto the wrongs. And I want to say over here that we truly believe that the greatest threat to peace, security, stability, and prosperity of our region is currently emanating from the Hindutva ideology, which is being propagated as state policy in our neighbor. And I also want to say that the people of Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir and the Muslim minority of India have borne the brunt of this agenda for far too long now. And just because the people have been going through gruesome state brutality for 70 years, therefore the world is no more obliged to look towards their distress. Therefore, we must all act as if there are no Security Council resolutions which exist which call it an area, a dispute, and a dispute yet to be settled. So, universal application of values is the message that is coming from the developing world to the developed world. Universal application of all values. Universal application of rules-based order. That's the message of the developing world to the developed world. And as I travel, and I had the good fortune of traveling to Africa, to Kigali for Chogam, I saw that resonating through all of developing country, no matter what the geography, in all of the African continent also. So these are important lessons, and I think we cannot afford to ignore these lessons. Now, as we go forward, I have already mentioned that the dire humanitarian and human rights situation in IIOJK and the threat to peace and security posed by Indian belligerents should be a cause of concern for the entire world, for the entire international community. But then when we see exceptions being made for countries which are big and countries which are small to be put through those very, very difficult routes, then I think the whole efficacy of the international world order is questioned. Now, the challenge for Pakistan is how to deal with a dispensation that pursues a permanently hostile and negative agenda in India, largely driven by domestic political considerations, and harbors hegemonistic designs in the region while benefiting all the time from its perceived role in the containment of China. So we find ourselves completely blocked in this heightened threat perception which is emanating from China to the rest of the world, and therefore the need to contain China, and therefore this net security provider who's been taken in to be one who we feel threatened by. So really an interesting quagmire that we see ourselves in. Now, that being said, and having said all of that, we still pursue goals of peace, stability, connectivity, regional cooperation, regional integration also one day. But allow me to share my fear with you that we feel that the world coming together to enable that, the time for that seems to have passed. Because we feel that the world is now only coming together to fuel more and more confrontation. And what we're seeing unravel in our own region is a threat that may not be seen and perceived and experienced by the world today, but it is a threat that will come back to haunt all of us, like all threats left unattended to. And that's a lesson from history that we've learned. Now, I would also want to say that interestingly, there are certain things which could be a game changer in the positive context, which have been seen to be a game changer in the negative context. Now, when Pakistan ventured into the CPEC, with China, we felt that this was a big giveaway for regional cooperation. What were we doing? We were creating a north, south, east, west infrastructure corridor which could feed Pakistan's dream of becoming a bridge between the east and the west, between, in some ways, East Asia and West Asia, right? But because of heightened threat perception, it was considered to be, it has never been looked at as an opportunity. We consider this to be an opportunity which still lies there, unexplored, unexploited, which can only have other addendums added to it to allow the entire region to actually benefit from this. Now, so China is a country that is perceived very differently, and this is something that I find very interesting, because Pakistan is also an interesting country. Our perception and how we view the world is obviously guided by where we sit geographically. But it is also guided by our history, obviously. It is guided by our interests like any other country. But we are one of the unique countries, I think, which tend to be in the northern conversations and in the southern conversations, in the eastern conversations and in the western conversations, again, because of the choices that we made in the past. Now, what I see very much is that the view of China in the West is very different from the view of China in the East. So, barring India, many neighbors of China look at it as not a country that they feel threatened by. And that is something which is important to me. Because if you have neighbors which do not feel threatened by you, that is largely, at least in most of South Asia. Then we look towards Afghanistan, and what we see is an interesting problem that is at our door. We truly believe that disengagement, even at the worst of circumstances, is never the answer. Disengagement can only lead to the problem becoming bigger and bigger. Now, we were told many decades back that the objectives of the world in Afghanistan were pretty much changing Afghanistan into a Switzerland, and will not fall short of that, right? And then we saw a hurried, what I may consider to be an unplanned departure from Afghanistan. The conditions in Afghanistan were not a factor that we were looked at as to what conditions were being left, but there was a departure. And after that, we all know what happened. As we speak today, the conditions in Afghanistan are not celebratory at all for anyone. But our question is that if, and Pakistan, I want to say this very clearly, is a country which is only guided by what Pakistan reflects through its own policies. So our view on girls going to school, our views on anything else is reflected by the choices that Pakistan makes. Pakistan is a country where a constitution gives the right and the responsibility of the state to ensure the education of women. Pakistan is a country where women are a major part of not only government and parliaments, but also you find women in every fora, in the sports fields, in banks, everywhere you go. That is who we are. That is the brief that we carry of the world. So when we speak to anyone, we speak to everyone as Pakistan. But my question to many entities who refuse to engage with the Afghan people because they are unhappy with what is happening over there, that as a mother of 2 young girls, I always ask the question that Khuda na khasta, if I'm ever to deal with a problem like this, that you were told that your girls cannot go to secondary school, would I choose to enable their starvation till the time that they can go to school? Or will we ensure that starvation is something that we steer away from? That Afghanistan has the wherewithal to be able to provide food and security to its own people. So selective engagement may not be something that we want to do. And the concerns of the world are reflected in the concerns for Pakistan, that Pakistan has. If the world has concerns on terrorism emanating from there, our concerns are multi-dimensional. But we all have to be pragmatic in our approach and deal with the realities as are presented. A very smart Prime Minister, once said that you have to deal with the world as it is, not how you wish it to be. So we can wish to deal with Switzerland's, but we have to deal with where we are, and we have to deal with the world as it is. So as a next door neighbor, we do not have the luxury or the option to disengage with whatever regime is in play in Afghanistan. Now, right next to us, Pakistan, also I want to say this categorically, continues to show its desire to strengthen, normalize as much as is possible, has already tried to normalize, but strengthen its ties with Bangladesh. I think we have to learn our lessons from history and move forward, not be bogged down by the past. We have to unleash our potential by being guided by history, not forgetting the lessons of history, but not allowing them to hold us hostage to a bad history. That's the biggest lesson I think that Pakistan has learned. And we wish that the environment in the world would be one that would allow us the space and the place to be able to demonstrate some of what we've learned. Now, I would also turn to the United States of America because it is generally conceived and perceived to be, it has been an exceptionally important partner to Pakistan. As we saw the floods take over Pakistan and 1/3 of Pakistan literally underwater, we saw the United States come in with generosity on humanitarian assistance. We saw every other country come in with generosity, many European countries, China, many Gulf countries, practically everyone. But with the United States of America, Pakistan seeks engagement at every level. Pakistan is very clear that it has strategic ties with China, but it has absolutely every wish to have the most wholesome ties with the United States of America, with European countries. With the European Union, we have had the GSP+, which has guided Pakistan's exports in a really good way. We've had an 86% escalation in exports in the last many years since GSP+. These are all win-win situations. And I am pleased to say that at this time, we feel rather comfortable in our ties, in the direction of our ties with the United States of America, with the European Union, with the rest of the world. Now, as we all know, Pakistan has deep relations with all of Muslim countries. We refuse to be bogged down by enmities or, which are interstate. And Pakistan is very keen. If you ask me what is one defining feature of Pakistan's foreign policy direction, it is to seek the opening of doors and windows of opportunity for Pakistan's trade, investment, and people. Trade, investment, and people. And within that breadth, whether we call it our geo-economic pursuits, we want doors to open for Pakistanis and for what is made in Pakistan. Within that context, our relations with Saudi Arabia, with Iran, with Turkey, with UAE, with Qatar, Bahrain, Indonesia, Malaysia, other ASEAN countries are all based on solid footing and are all ones that we want to promote in every which way. Africa, we have had a look towards Africa policy, and this is an area that we want to strengthen our relations forward as we go. So I think I have, they say that you lose your audience in 4 minutes, so I have already gone over for longer than that. But I would just like to end with some parting thoughts. And those are that we have seen the ravages of war. I believed that born post-1971, when I first became foreign minister, I remember going and telling my Indian counterpart that I have not seen a real war between India and Pakistan. I'm not bogged down with that history. I have not experienced it. Let my generation not be a generation which is bogged down by the basket of conflicts that we inherited. Let us unroll that basket and take some conflicts out rather than filling that basket with more and more conflicts. I think that's an important lesson. War has only brought catastrophic consequences. And some smart people say, some wise people say, that the world only moved towards war when it has seen peace for far too long and it has forgotten the lessons of war. I unfortunately think that we are in that time right now. The quest for peace and prosperity demands international cooperation and shedding of the zero-sum perspectives. I remind you once again of Churchill's dictum, in victory, magnanimity. I think magnanimity and leadership not for parochial interests, but leadership for what the existential threats that the world is facing right now is what we need to collectively see, and what we are, frankly speaking, right now not really seeing. So Pakistan will remain committed to peaceful coexistence and cooperation in the multilateral fora for win-win outcomes. We will continue to forge ahead with what we think is the right approach to take. So allow me to digress a little bit again. If we are a country which has been ravaged by 4 decades of conflict in our neighborhood, with great promises, and I believe $2.6 trillion spent in the Afghan adventure, the recent one, according to the cost of war studies. Okay, 926,000 people dead post 9/11 wars. 70,000 Pakistanis dead or maimed. Hundreds of thousands of Afghans, many NATO troops. This is the lesson that we refuse to unlearn. That 20 years of conflict ended in the 2020 document between the Taliban and the US government. And what came after that, we know, in terms of the exit. So when we go to the multilateral fora and we say we want immediate cessation of hostilities, we know what we're talking about. That is truly a Pakistan ask. So that is Pakistan bringing its own file to the table, not holding anybody else's file. And that is generally the biggest challenge to any country, to be always holding. When we go to the Afghans and deal with them and speak to them about what we feel about inclusivity, about women education, we hold the Pakistan file, not the Western file. We don't hold the Eastern file to the West, we don't hold the Western file to the East. We hold the Pakistan file. And we truly want to challenge and not get embroiled in great power confrontations and bloc politics. We will resist it to our last. While confident of our own security and defense capabilities, our priorities will remain focused on the socio-economic development of our country and the well-being of our people. Regional cooperation, integration, connectivity will remain our aspiration. And we will try and forge ahead as much partnership as we can towards that. And those whose interests will be aligned with ours, we will move ahead with them, wherever they may be geographically. And I truly believe that developing strong interlinkages is, in the immediate neighborhood, is imperative for durable peace and development in the region. We are conscious that we need to do much more in this respect and need to find innovative ways of advancing this objective. And I do want to say also that I hope the lesson that we are learning from the Ukrainian conflict is not to give up on interdependence. Interdependence and economic cohesion and the global village that we were all talked about is a good thing. Let's not move away from that. Let's not create these fortresses. I remember reading post-2008 financial crisis, The Economist cover page, and it said gated globalization. And that was the beginning of the gated globalization. And then we went towards fencing, and now we're going towards looking at interesting architecture where somebody can come in and somebody can't, and those who can maybe those who can't maybe never can. So Pakistan will continue with its limited resources, with humility. And that's another thing that we want to put in our foreign policy, humility. With humility, support an equitable and inclusive global order. At a middle-sized company, it is our goal, it is our objective, we feel it is our interest to have a global order which is equitable and which, as I already said before, which is seen to have a universal application on its, whether it's value system or rules-based order, as we call it. We hope to have an order in which no one is left behind. We strive for a world of peace, progress and prosperity in which benefits of development are truly shared by all. Now, the future may be unpredictable, but we like to believe that Pakistan has the resilience, a word that I'm sometimes not terribly fond of, but a word that certainly reflects what this country has been. It has been a resilient country. And we certainly also feel we have the capacity and the capability to deal with the challenges ahead. We will not be swerved in this or that direction to pursue any entity's interests. We will continue to forge ahead to pursue the interests of the people of Pakistan, and that remains the core of our foreign policy pursuits. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Hina Rabbani, for that eloquent address. I would now like to request President IPRI to kindly present memento to our chief guest, Ms. Hina Rabbani.